They burned it down, Evelyn Parker whispered into the phone, her voice barely holding together. Michael's diner, 28 years, all of it gone. The line was silent for 3 full seconds. Then Jackson Raven Cole's voice came through low and certain as a thunderhead rolling in off the desert. Are you still standing on your property? She said yes. He said 2 words that changed everything. Stay there. If you're new here, please subscribe to the channel and follow this story all the way to the end and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The call came at 2:13 in the morning. Not a phone call, not a knock at the door. It was the sound of her dog, a 10-year-old golden retriever named Biscuit, barking, the kind of desperate, throat-tearing urgency that doesn't happen over nothing. Evelyn Parker had lived alone for 5 years. She knew the difference between Biscuit chasing a jackrabbit across the scrub and Biscuit warning her that something was wrong with the world. She swung her legs off the bed and her feet hit the floor before she was fully awake. The smell reached her before the light did. Smoke. And underneath the smoke, something sharper, something chemical, something that didn't belong in a desert night, that should have smelled like cooling sand and dry sage. She pushed open the back door of her small house, the little adobe structure behind the diner that she and Michael had shared for nearly 3 decades, and what she saw stopped her breathing completely. The Golden Mesa Cafe was on fire. Not smoldering, not starting, already burning orange and savage and enormous against the black Arizona sky, the flames climbing the wooden siding, eating through the awning she'd repainted just last spring, curling through the front windows where Michael had hand-lettered the hours in gold paint the year they opened. The heat hit her face like a fist even from 40 feet away. Biscuit pressed against her legs and whimpered. Evelyn Parker did not scream. She stood very still, her bare feet in the dirt, her white nightgown catching the glow of the fire, and she watched 28 years burn. The firefighters arrived 11 minutes later. They did their jobs. They contained the worst of it. They kept the flames from jumping to the fuel tanks in the storage shed in her house. But the cafe itself, the kitchen where she had baked 1,000 pies, the counter where she had poured 100,000 cups of coffee, the corner booth, where Michael used to sit every Sunday morning with his eggs and his newspaper. All of that was gone, or damaged so badly that gone might as well be the word for it. One firefighter came to stand beside her while the others worked. He was young, maybe 25. He didn't know what to say, so he said the first honest thing in his head. "I'm sorry, ma'am." Evelyn nodded. She still hadn't cried. "You smell that?" she asked him. He hesitated. "Ma'am, under the smoke." She didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on the wreckage. "You smell what's underneath it." The young firefighter shifted his weight. "I'm not sure what you—" "Gasoline," she said quietly. "Somebody poured gasoline on my husband's diner." The young man went very still. He opened his mouth, closed it, then said something that told her everything she needed to know about what was coming. "You should probably talk to the sheriff in the morning." She turned to look at him then, really looked at him. He was already backing away. "Right," Evelyn said. She turned back to the fire. Biscuit pressed closer against her legs. She stood there until the flames were out and the smoke turned from orange-lit black to gray dawn, and she never went back inside her house to sleep. There was nothing left to sleep for. Sheriff Thomas Keller arrived at 9 in the morning. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders with a silver mustache that he kept groomed like it was the most important thing about him. He had been the sheriff of Creosote County for 16 years. He wore his authority the way some men wore expensive watches, not to tell the time, but to make sure you noticed. He walked the perimeter of the burned diner with his thumbs hooked in his belt, nodding slowly at nothing, and Evelyn followed 2 steps behind him, waiting. Finally, she said, "You can smell the accelerant." Keller glanced back at her. "Mrs. Parker, Evelyn." "Evelyn." He said her name like it was a mild inconvenience. "These old buildings, the wiring gets—" "Thomas." She stopped walking. "I've been smelling this property for 28 years. I know what an electrical fire smells like. I know what a grease fire smells like. I know what a dry wood fire smells like on a hot night. This was not any of those things." He turned to face her fully. His expression was patient in a way that wasn't kind. "We're going to do a full investigation," he said. "That's standard." "And Richard Holloway." Something shifted behind his eyes. Just for a second, quick enough that a person who wasn't watching for it might have missed it entirely. "What about Mr. Holloway?" "He's been trying to buy this property for 14 months, Evelyn said. "He's sent 3 different offers. I've turned down every one. He sent a man to my door last month, didn't say his name, didn't need to, who told me I should reconsider before something happened that I couldn't undo. You have that in writing. He didn't hand me a note, Thomas. He stood on my porch and told me to reconsider. Keller nodded again, slowly, the same patient empty nod he'd been performing since he arrived. I'll look into it, he said. He looked into it for exactly 9 days. Then he closed the case. The official determination was faulty wiring in the kitchen. Evelyn received the report by mail, 2 pages. The language was precise and careful and explained nothing. She read it 3 times sitting at her kitchen table, her real kitchen table in the house that hadn't burned, and when she finished the 3rd read, she set the papers down very carefully like they might break, and she looked out the window at the black skeleton of the cafe. Then she got up and started making coffee. While the water heated, she opened the junk drawer, past the rubber bands and the dead batteries and the takeout menus she'd been meaning to throw away for years. Her hand found what it was looking for. A small card, black, laminated, the edges slightly worn from the number of times she'd moved it from place to place over the years, from drawer to drawer, from wallet to box to drawer again, without ever being able to bring herself to throw it away. On one side, a number. Nothing else. On the other side, 4 words in Michael's handwriting. Michael had written those words the night the biker left. Evelyn hadn't asked him to. She'd come back from the bathroom and found Michael standing at the counter with the card in his hand, turning it over and over, and when she asked him why he'd written on it, he looked at her with that particular expression he had, serious but not worried, thoughtful but not heavy, and he said, because someday you might need to call this number, and when that day comes, I want you to remember why. The 4 words he'd written were, he is good people. Evelyn poured her coffee. She sat back down at the table. She looked at the card for a long time. The story of how Jackson Cole's card came to be in Evelyn Parker's possession started on a November night 18 years earlier, when the rain was coming down so hard on the desert highway that the lines on the road had disappeared entirely and the mountains were just suggestions in the dark. Evelyn and Michael were cleaning up after closing. It was past midnight. The last trucker had gone. The sign outside was off when the headlights swept across the front windows and a motorcycle pulled into the lot at a bad angle and stopped badly and didn't move. Michael was at the window in 3 seconds. Somebody's hurt, he said. They both went outside in the rain. The rider was still on the bike, but only barely. He was a large man, even hunched over the handlebars. He was clearly large, and his left leg was wrong in a way that legs aren't supposed to be wrong. The leather was torn from knee to thigh. The rain was washing blood down his boot and onto the asphalt in pale red rivulets. Michael got to him first. Can you hear me? Hey, can you hear me? The man's head came up. He had dark eyes and a beard and a face that had seen a considerable amount of the world, and even through the pain and the blood-loss pallor, there was something steady in it, something that didn't panic. I hear you, he said. We need to get you inside. I can't. He tried to move his leg and his face went white. My leg. I know, don't move it. We're going to help you. It took both of them to get him off the bike and into the diner. Michael took the weight on one side and Evelyn on the other, and even at 2/3 capacity, the man was substantial, and by the time they had him laid out in the corner booth, all 3 of them were soaked through and breathing hard. Evelyn said, I'm going to call an ambulance. No, the word came out flat and final. She looked at him. Your leg. No ambulance. He met her eyes. Please. She stood there in her wet clothes and looked at this stranger in her corner booth and made a decision in about 4 seconds. She didn't know his name. She didn't know why he didn't want an ambulance. She didn't ask. She just said, all right. Then she went and got the first aid kit and the clean towels and the bottle of whiskey they kept behind the counter for occasions that required something stronger than coffee. She and Michael worked for 2 hours. The leg wasn't broken. That was the first thing they established. The cut was deep but clean in most places, and Evelyn had grown up on a ranch and had dealt with worse. She cleaned it. She closed the worst of it with butterfly bandages because they didn't have sutures, and she wasn't about to sew up a stranger with a needle from her sewing kit. She wrapped it tight. She gave him the whiskey before, not after, because she'd learned from watching her father that the time to give a man something for the pain is before you cause more pain, not during or after. The man didn't make a sound through any of it. Not once. When she finished, he said, thank you. You should eat something, Michael said. I don't want to. You lost blood. Michael said in the same tone he used when he wasn't taking arguments from anyone, which was the same tone Evelyn had fallen in love with 26 years earlier. You need protein and you need liquid and you need to sit there and let it work. What do you want? We have eggs. We have chicken soup. We have about half a pie. The man was quiet for a moment. Soup, he said. Good choice. They ate together, the three of them, in the empty diner at 2 in the morning, while the rain hammered the roof and the desert flooded in the dark outside. The man didn't offer his name for a long time. They didn't ask. Eventually, over his third cup of coffee, he said, Jackson. Michael extended his hand across the table. Michael Parker, this is my wife, Evelyn. Jackson shook his hand. You didn't ask why I didn't want an ambulance. No, Michael said. Most people would have. Michael poured more coffee into all 3 cups. Most people don't always need to know everything about somebody to decide if they're worth helping. Jackson looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Evelyn. Then he looked back at his coffee. There are not many people like you, he said. There are more than you'd think, Michael said. You just have to find them. Jackson slept in the back booth that night, wrapped in a blanket Evelyn brought from the house. In the morning, the rain had stopped, and his color was better, and the bleeding hadn't come back through the bandage. He ate a full breakfast, eggs and toast, and enough coffee to wake a much larger man, and when he stood to go, he was careful with the leg, but he was upright. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the black card and set it on the counter. My number, he said. If you ever need anything, I mean anything, call that number. Evelyn had been going to say something gracious and demurring, something about how that wasn't necessary, about how they were glad to help. Michael picked up the card first. We'll keep it, Michael said. Jackson looked at him. Something passed between them, some understanding that didn't require words, the kind of thing that moves between people who recognize the same thing in each other. Keep it safe, Jackson said. He walked out to his motorcycle. He started it. He pulled out of the lot and onto the highway and disappeared south into the desert morning. Evelyn looked at Michael. Michael was turning the card over in his hand. You believe him, she asked. About what? About calling if we need something. Michael thought about it. He set the card on the counter and picked up his pen and turned it over and wrote his 4 words on the back. Yes, he said. I believe him. Michael Parker died of a heart attack 5 years ago on a Tuesday afternoon in March while he was fixing the back steps of their house. Evelyn found him when she came back from the bank. She sat with him on the ground for a long time before she called anyone. The grief that followed was the kind that doesn't announce itself dramatically and then get better. It was the quiet, grinding kind that rearranged everything. The bed was too big. The diner was too quiet without his voice in the kitchen. Sunday mornings without him in the corner booth were something she had to learn how to get through, and she had to learn it all over again every single week. What saved her was the diner. Not because it made her rich, it barely made her comfortable, but because it gave her a reason to be in the building, to be in the town, to be in the life that she and Michael had built together. The diner was his fingerprints, in his laugh, in his terrible handwriting on the recipe cards, in the particular way he'd arranged the coffee mugs on their hooks. As long as she kept the diner open, she had somewhere to put her grief that wasn't just inside herself. And then Richard Holloway decided he wanted her land. The first offer had come 14 months ago, a letter on professional letterhead from Holloway Development Group, outlining a purchase price that was generous enough to be interesting and specific enough to be serious. Evelyn had read it twice, set it aside, and not responded. The second offer came 6 weeks later. The number was higher. There was a handwritten note at the bottom from Holloway himself, friendly and collegial, saying he hoped they could work something out. She wrote back a single sentence, "The property is not for sale." The third offer came with a visit. Richard Holloway was 61 years old and looked like a man who had been told all his life that he was the most important person in every room he entered and had spent 61 years believing it. He had good hair and expensive clothes and the handshake of someone who used handshakes as instruments of assessment. He sat across from Evelyn in her diner with a cup of coffee he didn't touch and explained in patient and reasonable tones that he was planning a significant development along the highway corridor hotels, fuel stops, a small retail cluster that would transform the economic landscape of Silver Creek. This diner is directly in the path of that development, he said. I'm aware, Evelyn said. I'm also not moving. He blinked, just once. The blink of a man who encountered the word no so rarely that it still registered as something surprising. Mrs. Parker, Evelyn. He smiled. It was an excellent smile. I understand this place has sentimental value. It's not sentimental, she said. It's my husband's and mine. It's been here for 28 years. The people of this town eat here. The truckers coming through stop here. This is not a piece of land. This is a place, and I'm not selling it. Holloway was quiet for a moment. I respect that, he said. He picked up his coffee cup, finally took a sip, and set it back down. I hope you'll reconsider, he said pleasantly. I really do, because when projects of this scale move forward, they tend to, well, they change things, even for people who decide not to participate. He left a business card on the table. Evelyn left it there until a trucker sat in that booth an hour later and used it as a coaster. But she understood the message. She understood it more clearly. 3 weeks later, when the health inspector showed up unannounced and cited her for 6 violations that hadn't existed the week before. She spent $2,000 in 2 weeks fixing what didn't need to be fixed. Then another inspector came and found new violations. She fixed those too. Then the threatening letter arrived. Typed no signature slipped under her door sometime in the night. It said, "Wise women know when to walk away." Then someone broke her front window at 3 in the morning. Then the man who showed up on her porch, heavy-set, bland-face eyes like flat stones, who told her she should give the property a serious rethink before circumstances made the decision for her. Then the fire. Evelyn Parker sat at her kitchen table in the gray morning after the fire, holding a cup of coffee she'd forgotten to drink, holding the black card in her other hand, and she made a decision. Not a reckless decision, not an angry one. She wasn't a reckless woman. She wasn't an angry one, or at least she'd learned to be careful with anger the way you're careful with fire when you understand what it can do. She made a clear-eyed decision. She had been patient. She had done everything right. She had trusted the sheriff and the law and the normal systems that were supposed to protect people, and those systems had either failed her or been deliberately turned against her. She was 62 years old. She was alone. She had no money for a legal battle against a man with an entire development company behind him. She had no family within 400 miles. She had no political connections. She had nothing except the ground she was standing on, a dead man's card, and 18 years of hoping she'd never have to use it. She picked up her phone. She dialed the number. It rang 4 times. A voice answered, not Jackson's voice, deeper, more guarded, with a quality of alertness in it, like someone who answered unexpected calls by already being ready for trouble. Who is this? Evelyn took one breath. My name is Evelyn Parker. I'm calling from Silver Creek, Arizona. I'm looking for Jackson Cole. He gave me this number a long time ago. Silence. Where'd you say you were calling from? Silver Creek, outside of... Hold on. The line went quiet, but not dead. She could hear background sounds, engines, voices, something metal shifting. She waited. She drank her cold coffee. She waited some more. Then a different voice came on the line. Older, rough in the particular way that comes from years of outdoor living and probably not a lot of indoor quiet. This is Cole. Something in her chest loosened and tightened at the same time. Jackson. Her voice caught just slightly. This is Evelyn Parker from the Golden Mesa Cafe. I don't know if you remember. I remember, he said immediately. The rain, November, your husband Michael. She had not expected him to say Michael's name. The sound of it in someone else's mouth, someone who had known him, hit her somewhere behind the sternum, and she had to stop for a second. Michael passed, she said, 5 years ago. A pause. I'm sorry. Thank you. What happened? He said it simply, directly, without preamble. Not what can I do for you, or is everything all right? Just what happened. Like he already understood that a woman like Evelyn Parker would only use an 18-year-old card at 2 in the morning if something had happened. She told him. She told him all of it. The offers, the inspections, the broken window, the man on the porch, the fire, the sheriff closing the case in 9 days. She told it plainly without embellishment, because she did not need to embellish it. It was already bad enough, and men like Jackson Cole, she suspected, had good instincts for when they were being played against, and she had no interest in playing him. She talked for maybe 7 minutes. When she finished, there was silence on the line. Not the silence of someone who didn't know what to say. The silence of someone who was thinking. Then he said, "Are you still standing on your property?" "Yes." "You going to stay on it?" "I'm not leaving." Another pause. She heard him breathe. All right, he said. All right, what? Stay on your property, Evelyn. Don't leave. Don't talk to the sheriff again. Don't talk to Holloway. Don't sign anything. She gripped the card a little tighter. Jackson, what are you going to? You helped somebody when everybody else would have driven past, he said. You did that without asking questions and without wanting anything back. That doesn't leave a man's memory. A pause. I'll be in touch. The line went dead. Evelyn set the phone down on the table. She looked at the card in her hand, the black card with the worn edges and Michael's handwriting on the back. He is good people. You were right, Michael, she said quietly to the empty kitchen. You were right. She got up, rinsed her coffee cup, and put it in the rack. Then she walked outside, stood in the dirt in front of the wreckage of the Golden Mesa Cafe, crossed her arms over her chest and waited. She didn't know what was coming, but she knew for the first time since the fire that she was no longer standing there alone. She stood there for 3 days. Not literally, she slept, she ate, she took care of Biscuit, but in every way that mattered, Evelyn Parker did not leave that property. She moved through her small house behind the burned cafe like a woman operating on pure stubbornness and not much else. She made coffee she forgot to drink. She fed the dog at the right times because Biscuit hadn't done anything wrong and didn't deserve to suffer for what humans had decided to do to each other. She answered the phone when it rang and hung up when it was someone from the county assessor's office calling about updated property valuations in a tone that made the phrase sound like a threat wearing a suit. On the second morning, her neighbor Darlene came over. Darlene Marsh was 70 years old and had lived 3 houses down for 32 years, and she brought a casserole and her best worried face and sat at Evelyn's kitchen table with the posture of a woman prepared to stay until something happened or she ran out of things to say, whichever came first. You need to think about what you're doing, Darlene said. I know what I'm doing. Evelyn. Darlene put her hand on the table, palm down, the gesture she used when she wanted to be taken seriously. Richard Holloway has been buying and selling half this county since before your diner opened. He got the Breckett property. He got the land down by the old mill. He got the Vasquez family to sell after their well stopped working. Their well didn't just stop working, Evelyn said. Darlene was quiet. We all knew it, Evelyn said. Nobody said it out loud, but we all knew it. That's exactly what I mean. Darlene leaned forward. That's what I'm trying to tell you. This man, he doesn't stop. And he has Sheriff Keller in his... I know, Evelyn said. I know he does. Then what are you going to do? You can't fight this alone. Evelyn looked at her. I'm not alone. Darlene studied her face. What does that mean? It means I made a phone call. To who? Evelyn reached over and gave Darlene's hand a pat. Eat some of your own casserole. You brought enough for 6 people. Darlene stayed for 2 hours. She left still worried, still carrying a half-empty dish, and still not knowing what the phone call meant. That was fine. Evelyn didn't fully know either. All she had was a memory of Jackson Cole's voice, steady, unhurried, certain the way Deepwater is certain, saying stay on your property, like it was an instruction that contained everything else she needed inside it. So she stayed. On the 3rd afternoon, her phone rang. The number was one she didn't recognize. Arizona area code, but not local. Hello, Mrs. Parker. Not Jackson's voice. Younger, businesslike, but not unfriendly. My name is Danny Reyes. I ride with Jackson Cole. He asked me to call ahead. Evelyn straightened in her chair. Call ahead for what? We're coming to Silver Creek, Danny said. Jackson wants to make sure you're still on the property and you haven't talked to anyone, the sheriff, Holloway County officials, anyone since you called. I haven't talked to any of them. The sheriff's office called twice. I let it go to voicemail. Good. She could hear him writing something or typing. Don't call them back. I wasn't planning to. A pause. How many people are coming, Mr. Reyes? A brief silence on his end, like he was deciding how much to say. Enough, he said. The call ended. Evelyn sat at her table and turned the word over in her head. Enough. It was a strange word to use. Not many, not a few, not some. Enough, as if Jackson Cole had run an internal calculation. How much weight do you bring to balance a situation like this one? And had arrived at a number and called it by that name. She got up, made a fresh pot of coffee, and looked out the window at the burned skeleton of the cafe. Enough, she said to Biscuit. Biscuit looked up from his spot on the floor. Your guess is as good as mine, she told him. 40 miles east of Silver Creek in a town called Mineral Springs that most maps didn't bother to label Jackson Raven. Cole sat at a table in the back room of a building that served as the chapter's meeting place and looked at the 16 men arranged around him. I was 63 years old. He'd been writing since he was 19. He'd been leading since he was 34. His hair had gone to silver and his face had gone to lines, but his eyes were the same as they'd always been dark. Direct, missing nothing. He'd spent the last 48 hours making calls, not to one chapter, not to two. He'd called Arizona. He'd called Nevada. He'd called California, 3 separate chapters in California. He'd called New Mexico. He'd called Colorado. He'd called men he hadn't spoken to in years, and men he spoke to every week, and he'd said the same thing to all of them. A woman in Silver Creek helped me when I was bleeding in a ditch 18 years ago. Her husband's dead. Her diner's been burned to the ground. The man who did it owns the local sheriff. I'm going. That was it. That was the whole speech. Every single chapter said the same thing back. When do we ride? Now, Danny Reyes was sitting across from him with a legal pad full of notes and the focused expression of a man who organized things for a living and was already organizing this one. Final count as of this morning, Danny said. 530 confirmed. The room was quiet for a second. One of the men, a barrel-chested writer named Hector, who'd been with the chapter for 20 years, let out a slow breath. 530. Arizona's sending 112, Danny said. California's splitting between 3 chapters, combined total of 209. Nevada 88, New Mexico 64. Colorado's smaller, they're sending 57. Plus us, Jackson said. Plus us, 16. 530, Hector said again. Not disbelieving, just sitting with the weight of it. Jackson looked around the table. Nobody's riding in hot. Nobody's going in looking for a fight. We're going in visible, and we're going in peaceful, and we're going in with lawyers and cameras and investigators, and we are going to stand on that woman's property and make it absolutely clear to every single person in that town what it costs to destroy something that belongs to someone who can't defend it herself. And if Holloway pushes back, someone asked from the far end of the table, then Holloway pushes back against 530 witnesses, Jackson said, and we let the witnesses do the work. He leaned back. We're not going there to break anything. We're going there to fix something. There's a difference. Remember it. Richard Holloway did not know any of this. On the morning of the 4th day after the fire, Richard Holloway was having breakfast in the best restaurant in Silver Creek, which was not saying much, but it was saying something with his project manager, a thin, efficient man named Garrett Price, and they were discussing timelines. The assessors called twice, Garrett said. She hasn't responded. Holloway spread jam on his toast with the leisure of a man who believed that not responding was a form of obstinacy that time would cure. She'll respond. The county is ready to move on the eminent domain filing as if we need them. We won't need them. He took a bite of toast. She's 62 years old and alone, and she just lost her business. Give it another week. 2 at the outside. She'll call. And if she doesn't, Holloway looked at his project manager with the mild impatience of someone who doesn't enjoy being asked questions he's already answered. She will. Garrett Price looked down at his notepad. He had the instincts of a man who handled problems for other people, and therefore had spent his career noticing things that other people preferred not to notice. There's something else, he said. What? Derek Wallace. Derek Wallace was the contractor Holloway had used for the job. A local man not particularly bright, but reliable in the specific way that people who had been paid to do illegal things and hadn't been caught yet were reliable, which was to say reliable until they weren't. Holloway set down his toast. What about him? He's been drinking, Garrett said. More than usual. He went into Duffy's on Tuesday night and made some comments. What kind of comments? Garrett chose his next words carefully. The kind where someone has done something and is sitting on it, and the sitting is starting to be heavier than they expected. Holloway was quiet for 3 full seconds. Handle it, he said. I've already spoken to him, but Garrett paused. He's not steady, Mr. Holloway. He didn't expect her to just stay there. He thought she'd be gone by now. The longer she stays, the more it weighs on him. Then convince him that the weight goes away when she leaves, Holloway said. Tell him it's almost over. He picked up his toast again. It's almost over, he said. He believed this completely. He was wrong about almost everything. Sheriff Thomas Keller drove out to Evelyn's property that afternoon. He parked in front of the burned cafe, got out of his cruiser, and walked to her door. She answered before he knocked. She'd seen him pull in the way a person learns to watch the road when they're waiting for something. Evelyn. He had his hat in his hands. That was new. Keller was not a hat-in-hands kind of man. She looked at him without opening the screen door. I want to talk to you, Ed, he said. About what? He glanced at the burned building behind him. About the property, about the situation. You already told me it was faulty wiring. He shifted his weight. I know what the report says. Do you know what the truth says? His jaw tightened. Evelyn. Thomas? She kept her voice level. You've been sheriff of this county for 16 years. I've known you that whole time. You've eaten in my diner. You knew my husband. Whatever Richard Holloway is paying you or whatever he has on you, I don't know, and I'm not going to pretend I do. But I'm telling you that you look like a man who went to bed last night knowing something was wrong. He didn't answer. You should go, she said. I came here to tell you. He stopped, started again. There are people who want this resolved quickly. I'm not in a position to. You closed my husband's diner's arson investigation in 9 days and called it faulty wiring, Evelyn said. You're not in a position to do a lot of things, I understand. His face had gone through several different expressions during this conversation and was currently on one she couldn't fully read, something between shame and warning. Just think about what you're doing, he said. Whatever you think is going to help you here, it's not going to go the way you imagine. Holloway's got county commissioners. He's got state contacts. He's got... I'm not leaving my property, Evelyn said. Nobody's asking you to... You were... Yeah, she said. 2 days ago, twice by voicemail, which I didn't return. He put his hat back on, the gesture of a man retreating into the role that made him feel like himself. I'm trying to look out for you, he said. With respect, Thomas, she said, you're 16 years too good at looking out for people who can hurt you. You don't have a lot of practice looking out for people who can't. She closed the door. She heard his boots on the steps. She heard the cruiser door. She heard him back out and drive away. Then she stood with her back against the door and let out a breath that came from somewhere deep in her chest. Not relief, not victory, just the release of adrenaline that comes from holding yourself very still and very steady when every nerve in your body is screaming. Biscuit came and stood next to her. She reached down and put her hand on his head. Good boy, she said. He leaned against her leg. That night around 9 o'clock, she got another call from Danny Reyes. We're staging in Kingman tonight, he said. All the Arizona chapters plus some of the California and Nevada advance riders. Full convoy moves in the morning. Her hand tightened around the phone. How does this work? What happens when you get here? Jackson will talk to you directly about that, Danny said. But the general idea is we arrive. We make our presence known. We establish that there are 530 pairs of eyes on what's happening in Silver Creek. Then the people Jackson brought in, the investigators, the attorneys, they start doing their work. Evidence, witnesses, documentation. Everything legal. What about Holloway? Holloway's going to have a very bad few days, Danny said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. After she hung up, Evelyn sat in the dark for a while. She thought about Michael. She thought about the night Jackson had shown up bleeding and rain-soaked, and she thought about the way Michael had looked at the black card before writing his 4 words on the back. She thought about what he'd said, you just have to find them. Good people in the most unlikely places, wearing the most unlikely things, carrying the most unlikely histories. You just had to find them. At 7 the next morning, 2 things happened almost simultaneously. The first was that Garrett Price called Richard Holloway's cell phone. Holloway was still at home. He answered on the second ring. We have a problem, Garrett said. What kind of problem? There's a convoy, Garrett said, on I-40 coming out of Kingman. Holloway sat up. What do you mean a convoy? I mean motorcycles, Garrett said. A lot of motorcycles. Someone on the highway patrol called a contact of mine. They're describing it as his word enormous. Holloway was quiet. What does this have to do with... One of the motorcycle clubs that's with them has been identified, Garrett said, as Hell's Angels. The silence on Holloway's end lasted 4 seconds. That's not possible, he said finally. It's confirmed. Why would he stopped? He started putting things together, the widow, the diner, the fire. He thought about Evelyn Parker sitting alone in her house for 4 days, not talking to anyone, not calling the sheriff back, not doing any of the things that a frightened and isolated woman with no resources was supposed to do. Who does she know, he said mostly to himself. Apparently, Garrett said more than we knew. The second thing that happened at 7 that morning was that Evelyn Parker's phone rang. Jackson Cole's voice. No preamble. We'll be there in 2 hours, he said. You holding up? I'm holding up. Good. A pause. Evelyn, I want you to hear something from me before we get there. What? We're coming for you, he said. Not for Holloway, not to prove anything, not to make a point. We're coming because somebody did something wrong and you don't have to face that alone. That's it. That's the whole reason. She had not cried since the night of the fire. Standing in the kitchen with the phone pressed to her ear, she came very close. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, he said. We might eat you out of coffee. The laugh came out of her before she could stop it. Real and sudden and a little rough around the edges, the laugh of someone who hadn't done it in days. Michael would have liked you, she said. A beat of quiet. Based on what you told me about him, Jackson said, I'd have liked him too. Word spread through Silver Creek the way word always spreads through small towns, which is to say faster than is physically explicable, and before anyone has any real information to work with. By 8 in the morning, people were calling each other. By 8:30, people were standing on their front porches talking to their neighbors. By 9, the diner 2 blocks from the sheriff's office, not Evelyn's diner, the other one, the one that had done quiet but decent business. Partly because Evelyn's cafe caught most of the highway traffic, was packed with people who came for coffee and stayed for the conversation. Heard it's 100, someone said. Heard it's 300, someone else said. My nephew works highway patrol, a third person said, and the table went quiet because that was the kind of sentence that carried authority in a room full of people who were speculating. He said the convoy is over 5 miles long, said he's never seen anything like it. 5 miles. That's what he said. The silence that followed that had a particular texture to it. Not fear exactly, not excitement exactly. Something between the two that people sometimes call awe and sometimes call reckoning. She called them, Darlene Marsh said from the corner booth. She had her coffee and her casserole dish. She'd brought a fresh one, and she had the expression of a woman who was revising her understanding of several things at once. She told me she wasn't alone. I didn't know what she meant. Nobody said anything. I should have known, Darlene said quietly. Evelyn Parker Diaz never said something she didn't mean. At the county assessor's office, a clerk named Monica Jimenez was on the phone with her supervisor when she saw the first rider pass her window, then the second. Then she stopped paying attention to her supervisor entirely. She moved to the window and looked out. They were moving through town from the west, coming in off the highway in a formation that stretched as far back as she could see. Not racing, not aggressive, not doing anything that you could point at and say was wrong. Just riding in organized columns, the sound of the engines filling everything up. She had lived in Silver Creek her whole life, and she had never seen anything like it. Her supervisor's voice was still coming from the phone in her hand. Monica, are you still there? She put the phone to her ear. I have to call you back, she said. She hung up. She kept watching. Richard Holloway's office was on the second floor of the newest building in Silver Creek, due being a relative term since he'd had it built 6 years ago, and he stood at his window and watched the motorcycles come. He stood very still. He had made a lot of calculations in his life. He had miscalculated before. Everyone who took risks miscalculated sometimes. But this was a category of miscalculation that he didn't have a name for. He had looked at Evelyn Parker, 62 years old, alone, no money, no lawyers, no family nearby, and he had seen a problem that would solve itself given a little pressure and a little time. He had not looked at what she had been or where she had been or who had passed through her life in 28 years of running a roadside diner on a desert highway. He had not thought about the rider she'd found bleeding in the rain. He had not thought about debts. He stood at his window and watched 530 motorcycles fill the streets of his town. And for the first time in a very long time, Richard Holloway did not know what to do next. Evelyn heard them before she saw them. She was standing in front of her property exactly where Jackson had told her to stand, where she'd been standing for 4 days when the sound reached her. Low at first, more felt than heard a rumble that moved through the ground before it moved through the air. Biscuit came to stand beside her, his ears up, his head tilted. Then she saw them, coming down the road toward her property. Hundreds of motorcycles, hundreds of men and some women in formation, unhurried the morning sun, catching chrome and leather, and the particular clarity of a desert sky that doesn't filter anything. Leading the formation was a rider she recognized immediately. Not by his face, not yet, he was still too far away for that. But by the way he carried himself, the same steadiness she'd felt in his voice on the phone. The same thing she'd seen in him 18 years ago lying in her corner booth with a torn-up leg and a calm face while she stitched him back together. The formation slowed as it approached her property. The first rider stopped. He took off his helmet. Jackson Cole was older. Of course, he was 18 years. His hair was silver and the lines on his face were deeper, and there was a particular gravity to him that came from the accumulated weight of a life that hadn't been simple. But the eyes were the same, dark and direct and missing nothing. He looked at her, she looked at him. The world was full of the sound of engines slowing and stopping, hundreds of them, one after another, until finally the only sound was the desert wind and the distant tick of cooling metal. "Evelyn Parker," Jackson said. "Jackson Cole," she said back. He climbed off his bike. He walked to her, and when he reached her, he stopped, and he held out his hand. She took it. They shook hands the way people do when words are inadequate, and something more formal than a hug is what the moment calls for. "You stayed on your property," he said. "I told you I would." He looked at the burned cafe behind her. His jaw moved once, just slightly, the way a person's jaw moves when they're taking in something that makes them angry, but they've made a decision to be useful rather than angry. "We're going to fix this," he said. "Not a promise in the way people make promises when they're trying to comfort someone. A statement of fact in the way an engineer states that a bridge can hold a certain weight. Simple. Based on what he knew to be true." Evelyn looked at him. Then she looked out at the hundreds of riders filling the road and the lot and the shoulder. All of them stopped, all of them watching, all of them there. "Michael would have made you all breakfast," she said. Jackson almost smiled. "What's your coffee situation?" "I have 4 pounds in a large commercial pot that survived." "Good, well," he said. "We're going to need it." Behind her, Biscuit finally stopped being uncertain about the situation and walked forward to sniff Jackson's hand. Jackson looked down at the dog and then scratched him behind the ears with the ease of a man who knew dogs. "Good boy," Jackson said. Biscuit wagged his tail. Somewhere in the town of Silver Creek, at that exact moment, a man named Derek Wallace was sitting in his truck on a back road with his hands on the steering wheel, and the weight of what he'd done pressing down on him like a physical thing. He'd been watching the motorcycles come in from the highway, counting them the way you count things that terrify you without being able to stop. He reached for his phone. He looked at the contact he'd stored as R.H. Richard Holloway, and he sat with his thumb over the name for a long moment. Then he scrolled past it. He found a different number, one he'd been thinking about since Tuesday night at Duffy's bar, when he'd had 4 drinks too many and said 4 things too many, and had gone home afterward in the cold grip of the specific fear that comes from having done something you can't undo and then said something about it to the wrong person. He called the number. A woman answered. "Creosote County Investigative Services." Derek Wallace closed his eyes. "I need to talk to someone," he said. "I have information about a fire." Derek Wallace sat in that truck for 11 minutes after he made the call. He knew because he watched the clock on his dashboard the whole time, the way you watch a clock when the rest of your brain is too full of noise to do anything useful. 11 minutes. The woman at Creosote County Investigative Services had taken his name and his number and told him someone would call him back within the hour. She'd said it in a calm, professional voice, the kind of voice that didn't react to what you told it and that had somehow made it worse. He'd wanted her to sound shocked. He'd wanted some kind of external confirmation that what he was doing was as significant as it felt. She'd said within the hour and thanked him for calling. He put the phone in his cup holder and stared at the windshield. "I was 44 years old. He had a contracting business that had been barely alive for 3 years. He had a daughter in Flagstaff who called him on holidays and sometimes on his birthday. He was not a good man in the way that some people were genuinely good. He knew that about himself, but he had spent most of his life thinking he was at least not the kind of man who burned down a widow's diner. Until he was. Holloway's man had come to him 6 weeks ago. Not Holloway himself, men. Like Holloway didn't do things themselves. They sent men, which was its own kind of cowardice that Derek had not thought too hard about at the time, because the number they'd offered him was significant and his business was struggling, and he had told himself the diner was insured, the woman would be fine, it was just property. He had told himself a lot of things in those 6 weeks. None of them had made the weight any lighter. And then the motorcycles had come. He'd been on that back road when the convoy came through, and he'd sat in his truck and actually counted, losing track past 200 and starting over. And somewhere around the third count, he had understood with his whole body, not just his mind, that the world had changed shape around what he'd done, that it wasn't going to quietly resolve itself, that Evelyn Parker was not going to pack up and disappear the way Holloway had promised she would. That the woman in that little house behind the burned cafe was connected to something larger and more serious than anyone had calculated. His phone rang. He picked it up on the first ring. "Mr. Wallace, this is Agent Carol Reyes with the Arizona Department of Public Safety. I understand you have information relevant to an arson investigation in Silver Creek." Derek pressed his back teeth together. "Yeah," he said, "I do. Are you somewhere you can talk?" "I'm in my truck, on Micah Road out past the junction. Is anyone with you?" "No." "All right, Mr. Wallace, before we continue, I want to make sure you understand your rights in this situation. Anything you tell me could—" "I know my rights," Derek said. "I did it. I set the fire. I was paid by Richard Holloway to do it." He said it all in one breath, fast, like pulling a bandage. "I want to tell you everything. I want to know what happens to me if I cooperate." There was a pause on Agent Reyes's end. Professional measured, but he could hear the quality of attention sharpen. "Mr. Wallace," she said, "I think we should meet in person." Jackson Cole did not know about Derek Wallace's phone call yet. He was standing on Evelyn's property with Danny Reyes, no relation to the agent, and a woman named Sandra Cho, who was a 41-year-old attorney out of Phoenix, who had a reputation for taking cases that other attorneys found either too complicated or too risky, or both, and who had driven to Silver Creek the previous night at Jackson's request without asking a lot of questions about money. Sandra had been walking the perimeter of the burned cafe for the past 20 minutes with her phone out, photographing everything, and now she came back to where Jackson and Danny were standing, and she looked at Jackson with the expression of a woman who had just confirmed several things she'd already suspected. "The accelerant pattern is still visible," she said. "Here and along the east wall. An independent fire investigator is going to be able to testify to this without any trouble at all." "And Keller's report," Sandra made a short sound that was not quite a laugh. "His report says faulty wiring. The faulty wiring is supposedly located in the kitchen." She glanced back at the building. "The accelerant patterns are on the exterior walls and the front of the structure. There is no electrical explanation for a fire that starts on the outside of a building." "So the report is not just wrong," Jackson said. "It's provably wrong. In a courtroom, absolutely provably wrong." She put her phone in her jacket pocket. "I've already put in a call to the state fire marshal's office. They should be here by tomorrow morning. Once they issue their own report, Keller's report becomes a liability to everyone who signed off on it." Danny was writing. "What about Holloway directly?" "That's harder," Sandra said. "Getting from the fire to Holloway requires a human chain. Somebody did this for money and somebody paid them." She looked at Jackson. "Do we have anything pointing toward who Holloway used?" Jackson looked at Danny. Danny looked up from his notes. "We're working on it." Evelyn was inside her house, making the largest pot of coffee she'd made in her life, when Darlene knocked and came in without waiting, which was how Darlene had always operated, and which Evelyn had long ago decided was either a flaw or a feature depending on the day. "There are men in your parking lot directing traffic," Darlene said. "I know. There are hundreds of motorcycles in this town." "I know, Darlene. I counted at least 4 men with cameras." "Those are the investigators and press," Evelyn said. "And possibly press. I don't know about the press. Jackson didn't mention press." Darlene sat down at the table. She looked at Evelyn. She looked at the coffee. She looked at Evelyn again. "Who is Jackson?" she said. Evelyn poured 2 cups and sat down. "You remember that November," she said. "The bad rain year, when Michael and I found that man on the highway." Darlene thought for a second. Then her eyes changed. "The biker. The biker. Evelyn." Darlene set down her coffee. "That was almost 20 years ago. 18. And you just called him after 18 years and he brought—" She gestured in the general direction of outside meaning. All of it, the hundreds of riders and the investigators, and the sound that had been filling the town for the last 2 hours. He gave us a card, Evelyn said. Michael kept it. I kept it after Michael. She wrapped her hands around her mug. I didn't want to use it. I kept thinking there was another way. That the sheriff would do his job. That the county would... She stopped. But there wasn't another way. And I was out of things to try on my own. Darlene was quiet for a moment. The Vasquez family, she said finally. When their well stopped. We all knew what happened. Everyone in this town knew. And nobody did anything. I know. I didn't do anything, Darlene said. I brought them a casserole. Evelyn looked at her. That's what I do, Darlene said. I bring casseroles, as if a casserole... Her voice caught briefly. As if a casserole does anything about the actual problem. Darlene. I'm serious, Evelyn. We've all been sitting here for years watching Holloway do what he does, and we've all been telling ourselves there's nothing we can do about it. And maybe that was just easier than admitting that we were afraid. The kitchen was quiet. You're not afraid, Darlene said. You've never been afraid of him. You're the only one. I've been afraid, Evelyn said. Every day since the fire. Every day before the fire, if I'm being honest. I was just more afraid of what it would mean to leave. She looked at the window. Past it somewhere, 530 people were standing on her property and in her road because 18 years ago, she and Michael had not driven past a man bleeding in the rain. Michael always said kindness compounds, she said, like interest, slowly and then all at once. Darlene pressed her lips together. Her eyes were bright. He was a smart man, she said. He really was. Richard Holloway called Sheriff Keller at 10:30. Keller picked up on the first ring, which told Holloway something about the state of the man's nerves. Tell me you have this under control, Holloway said. They haven't done anything illegal, Keller said. They came in on public roads. They're standing on private property with the property owner's permission. I'm not asking you what you legally can't do, Thomas. I'm asking you what you're doing. There's nothing to do, Keller said. And Richard, I need you to hear me. There are cameras everywhere. Press cameras, investigator cameras, private cameras. If I so much as drive past that property in a way that looks wrong, it's going to be filmed and it's going to be somewhere it shouldn't be by tonight. Holloway's grip on his phone tightened. Who are these investigators? Where did she find? The attorney is Sandra Cho, Phoenix. Silence. Sandra Cho was not a name Richard Holloway was delighted to hear. He knew of her the way powerful men know of the particular attorneys who specialize in making powerful men uncomfortable by reputation, by outcome, by the particular shape of the cases she won. And the state fire marshal's office called my deputy this morning, Keller said. His voice had dropped the way voices drop when someone is saying something they've been dreading. They're sending investigators. Tomorrow. On what basis? On the basis of a complaint filed by the attorney. A pause. And on the basis of Richard, there are reporters here from Phoenix. There's someone from a Tucson station. This isn't a local thing anymore. It can still be contained. I don't think it can. Keller said it quietly, like a man reading a weather report for a storm that was already there. Holloway stood at his window. He looked at the street below where he could see the motorcycles parked along the curb, the riders moving in and out of the area around Evelyn Parker's property 4 blocks away. Find out who she talked to, he said. Find out how she got these people here. There's a chain. There's always a chain. Find it. I'll try, Keller said. But his voice said something different. His voice said, it's already too late for chains. Holloway hung up and stared at his phone for a moment. Then he called Garrett Price. Garrett answered immediately. I know, he said before Holloway could speak. What do you know? Derek Wallace has been trying to call you. Holloway went very still. What? 3 times this morning. He's not reaching you, so he started calling my line. I haven't answered. A pause. Richard, he's cracking. The silence that followed was the longest Richard Holloway had been silent in years. Where is he? He said finally. His truck. Somewhere outside of town. Get to him right now. Get to him before he... I've been trying, Garrett said, and his voice had a quality in it that Holloway had never heard before. Not panic exactly, but the precursor to it, the vibration just below panic. He's not answering my calls. He's not answering your number either, which is why he called mine. He knows you're not picking up. Richard, if he thinks you're cutting him loose. Get to him, Holloway said. Tell him he's taken care of. Tell him it's almost done. Tell him, I don't think he believes that anymore, Garrett said. I think he's been sitting out there watching those motorcycles and doing math that doesn't come out in our favor. Holloway walked away from the window. He sat down in his desk chair for the first time in 2 hours. I thought about Derek Wallace and the math that didn't come out in their favor, and he thought about Sandra Cho and the state fire marshal, and he thought about 530 motorcycles and cameras and reporters from Phoenix and Tucson, and he thought about Evelyn Parker standing on her property in the desert morning, 62 years old, not going anywhere. He had underestimated her. He had done it completely and at every step, and it was the most expensive mistake he had made in his professional life. Keep trying to reach him, Holloway said, but Garrett Price was already 3 calls too late. Agent Carol Reyes met Derek Wallace at a gas station on the edge of town because he hadn't wanted to drive back into Silver Creek, and she hadn't wanted him to either. She was 46 short with the kind of face that absorbed information without giving much back, and she had a recorder on the table between them and a legal pad and a cup of coffee she'd bought from the station. Derek Wallace looked like a man who hadn't slept in 4 days, which roughly was accurate. I told her everything. He talked for 53 minutes. He told her about the initial contact Garrett Price in a parking lot 6 weeks ago, an envelope with a down payment in cash and a set of instructions. He told her about the night he'd gone to the diner at 2 in the morning with a 5-gallon can of accelerant and the specific, deliberate way he'd spread it along the exterior walls and the front of the building to make sure the structure caught fast. He told her he hadn't thought she was sleeping in the house behind it, and then he told her that he had known there was a house behind it, and that was the moment his voice broke just once quickly, because those 2 facts existed in his head at the same time and always had, and he'd been trying to make them coexist with his sense of himself as not that kind of person, and they wouldn't. Agent Reyes let him take a moment. Then she said, the payment came from Price directly. The first payment did. The second was supposed to come from an account he said was a company account. He wrote down a name, Southwestern Infrastructure Partners. She wrote it down. In Holloway, his name came up directly. Price said Mr. Holloway's project about 6 times in our first conversation, Derek said. And when I asked for more money because the job was more complicated than he made it sound, he said he'd have to check with Richard. He called him Richard. He looked at his hands. It wasn't subtle. None of it was subtle. I think they didn't think it needed to be. Reyes looked at him because they didn't think anyone would look, because they didn't think she had anyone. He paused. I didn't think she had anyone either. Agent Reyes closed her legal pad. Mr. Wallace, she said, I'm going to need you to come with me and give a formal recorded statement. I'm also going to need any documentation you have, text, phone records, anything written. We're going to have someone look at your financial records with your consent, which I'm asking for now. She slid a form across the table. And I need you to understand that your cooperation will be taken into account, but I can't make you any promises today about what I understand, Derek said. I know what I did. He signed the form without reading it, not because he was careless, but because he'd already made the decision in his truck on Micah Road, and there was nothing left to deliberate. I know what I did, and I'm going to say it as many times as you need me to say it. He looked out the window of the ground station. She didn't do anything, he said. She didn't do anything. She just wouldn't sell. Reyes let the silence sit. Let's go, she said. Jackson found out about Derek Wallace's cooperation through Danny, who heard from a contact at the state DPS office at approximately 11:15 that morning. I was sitting with Sandra Cho at a folding table that someone had set up outside. One of the riders had pulled it from somewhere. The kind of practical improvisation that happened when you had 500 people who were all in their various ways used to making things work without much infrastructure. And Sandra had her laptop open and several files spread out. And when Danny put a hand on Jackson's shoulder and bent down and said something quietly into his ear, Jackson went very still. Sandra looked up. Good news, she said. Jackson looked at her. The man who set the fire made a call this morning. He's in the process of giving a full statement to the state DPS. Sandra set down her pen, naming Holloway and Price, his project manager. And apparently there's a company account, Southwestern Infrastructure Partners, that the payments ran through. Sandra was already typing. Her face had the particular focus of an attorney who has just seen a case restructure itself from difficult to winnable. That's a money trail. If the payments went through a company account, we have documentation. We have a paper chain that goes directly to Holloway regardless of how many hands it passed through. How fast can you move on this? If DPS has his statement and they're moving to pull financial records, the DA's office gets involved automatically. She looked up from the screen. Richard Holloway is going to have criminal exposure by the end of today, Jackson. Not civil, criminal. Jackson said nothing for a moment. He looked toward Evelyn's house. She doesn't know yet, he said. Do you want to tell her? I thought about it. Not yet, not until there's something solid to tell her. She's been through enough days that started with hope and turned into nothing. I'm not going to give her hope until it has weight behind it. Sandra nodded. She understood that. It was in its way a form of respect that she didn't encounter often enough. Give me an hour, she said. I'll have a clearer picture of where DPS is in the process. The town of Silver Creek was not the same place it had been 24 hours ago. That was the only way to describe what was happening. And it wasn't something you could point to as a single event. It was distributed. It was in the conversations happening in the diner 2 blocks over, where people who had been afraid to say Holloway's name out loud in public were saying it now in full sentences. It was in the fact that Monica Jimenez at the county assessor's office had put a hold on the property valuation updates because she had called her supervisor, and her supervisor had called the county attorney, and the county attorney had said very carefully that in light of the current situation, it would be prudent to pause any pending actions related to the Parker property. It was in the fact that 3 more local people had come to the folding table outside Evelyn's property and asked to speak to investigators. One was the owner of the hardware store, who had been pressured by a county inspector to report a code violation on his building at a time that seemed, in retrospect, connected to his refusal to sell a lot adjacent to his store to a Holloway subsidiary. Bournet was a ranch foreman who had witnessed a conversation between Garrett Price and a county official that, in his words, sounded a lot like 2 people figuring out how to make someone's life very difficult. One was a woman named Patricia Salinas, who had been the Vasquez family's neighbor and who had taken photographs of a county water truck at an well, in the weeks before it failed, photographs she had kept for 2 years without knowing what to do with them. They came one by one to the table. They sat down, they talked, and the investigators wrote everything down. Hector, who had ridden with Jackson for 20 years, came to stand beside him around noon and looked at the steady stream of people coming to the table and said, "They were all just waiting." "That's how it usually works," Jackson said. "People know things. They sit on them because they don't think it matters, or because they're afraid, or because they don't think anyone's listening. And then something changes." He watched a woman with photographs hand them carefully across the table to a man with a camera. Something changes, and suddenly everyone's ready to talk. "What changed?" Jackson looked at him. "She didn't leave." Hector was quiet. "That's it," Jackson said. "That's the whole thing. She stayed on her property and she didn't do what they expected her to do. And then we showed up. And now people can see there's a place to put what they know." He paused. "Fear is specific. It's got a target. When the target's not afraid, some of the fear breaks up." In Cheyenne, at 12:45, Garrett Price tried for the last time to reach Derek Wallace. The call went to voicemail. He sat in his car outside Holloway's office building and looked at his phone and understood with the clarity that comes to people when they have run out of options to not understand something that Derek Wallace had made his call, and that call had not been to Garrett Price. He thought about his own position. "I thought about the company account, Southwestern Infrastructure Partners, which existed on paper as a consulting firm and in reality as a vehicle for exactly this kind of payment. And he thought about the records attached to that account and how long it would take someone with a subpoena to trace them. Not long was the answer. He picked up his phone. He scrolled to a number he'd stored under a first name, only a name that belonged to a criminal defense attorney in Scottsdale, who did not advertise the particular specialty that made him useful to people in Garrett Price's situation. He called it. "I need an appointment," he said when the attorney answered. "Today, it's urgent." Keller was in his office when his deputy knocked and came in with an expression that Keller had learned in 16 years to read as bad news wearing its best face. "What?" Keller said. "State DPS is here," his deputy said. "2 agents. They're asking for the original file on the Parker fire." Keller looked at his desk, at the closed drawer where the original file was. "Did they have anything?" he said, meaning paperwork. meaning authority. They have a warrant, his deputy said. The warrant was the end of the 9-day arson investigation being whatever Keller needed it to be. The moment those agents walked out with the original file, every inconsistency between the actual evidence and the official conclusion was going to belong to the state, not to him. He opened the drawer. He picked up the file. He held it for a moment. In 16 years of being sheriff, Thomas Keller had made a lot of small compromises. That was how it always started, small and then smaller, still until the compromises were structural and load-bearing, and you couldn't remove them without the whole thing coming down. He had told himself each time that it was just this once, that the situation required it, that the people he was protecting were the kind of people who ran the county and kept it stable and employed people and paid taxes, and that stability was worth some accommodation. He had not said any of this to himself about Evelyn Parker. He had not thought specifically that Evelyn Parker was acceptable collateral. He had simply not thought about Evelyn Parker at all, which was its own category of failure, and in some ways the more honest one. He stood up. He carried the file to the front where the two agents were waiting. "I want to cooperate," he said. "I want that on the record." One of the agents took the file. The other one looked at him. "We'll need a statement, Sheriff," she said. "I know," Keller said. "I know you will." Jackson was standing with Evelyn at her front step when Danny came back with the update at 2 in the afternoon. Danny said it plainly the way Jackson had taught him to deliver things. The contractor gave a full statement. State DPS has Holloway and Price named directly. Financial records from the company account are being pulled. The state fire marshal confirmed accelerant on the site this morning. It's already in writing. Sandra says the DA's office is being briefed as of this hour. Evelyn stood very still. Jackson watched her. She said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, So it's real." "It's real," Danny said. She turned away from them and looked at the burned structure of the Golden Mesa Cafe. She stood with her back to them and her arms crossed and her head slightly bowed. Jackson made a slight gesture to Danny, give her a minute, and Danny took 2 steps back. They waited. When Evelyn turned back around, her eyes were wet, but her face was something harder than tears. It was the face of a woman who had survived something and was only now in this moment allowing herself to understand what surviving it meant. "He's actually going to be held accountable," she said. "That's where it's going," Jackson said. "Thomas Keller, too." "That's where it's going," he said again. She pressed her lips together, breathed through it. "The diner," she said. "The investigation, does that help with getting the property damages addressed? The insurance, Sandra's on it," Jackson said. "She's got documentation that the cause of loss was arson on the part of a third party. The insurance claim looks different now than it did under Keller's report." He paused. "You're not going to have to fight this alone." Evelyn looked at him, really looked at him the way you look at someone when you're trying to match the person in front of you to the person in your memory. "I thought you were going to say there was nothing you could do," she said. "When I called you, I thought I don't know. Say it had been too long. Say it was too complicated." "You pulled a stranger out of the rain," Jackson said. "There's no statute of limitations on that." She shook her head slowly, something between a laugh and something raw. "I just helped someone who needed it. Michael and I didn't think about it. We just did it." "I know." Jackson looked at her. "That's exactly why it mattered." Behind them, over the property and into the road, and as far as the eye could follow, 530 people were still there, still present, still waiting for whatever came next, patient in the particular way of people who had decided to be somewhere and meant it. The afternoon sun was going low and hot, and the desert was starting to glow at the edges the way it does before it shifts into evening. And somewhere across town, a man named Derek Wallace was in a room talking into a recorder. And somewhere else, Richard Holloway was in his office with the curtains closed. And somewhere, a defense attorney in Scottsdale was meeting with a nervous project manager who was just beginning to understand what it meant to be the last one holding a bag that nobody else was willing to carry. Evelyn Parker stood in front of what remained of her husband's cafe. And for the first time since the fire, she did not feel like the last person standing. She felt like the first. The arrest warrant for Richard Holloway was signed at 4:47 in the afternoon. Sandra Cho got the call while she was still at the folding table outside Evelyn's property, and she did not celebrate. She wrote down the information, said thank you, ended the call, and sat for a moment with her hand flat on her legal pad before she stood up and walked to where Jackson was standing. "It's done," she said quietly. "DA signed off. They're executing it within the hour." Jackson looked at her. Holloway and Price both. Holloway, Price, and the sheriff. She paused on that last one. Keller cooperated, but cooperation doesn't erase the fact that he actively suppressed evidence and filed a false report. He'll have his cooperation weighed at sentencing, but he's being charged. Jackson let out a slow breath through his nose. "How many counts?" "Holloway is looking at arson, conspiracy, destruction of property, wire fraud through the company account, and attempted coercion. Price is similar, plus money laundering through Southwestern Infrastructure Partners. Keller is evidence tampering and abuse of official capacity." She looked toward the house. "Does she know?" "Not yet." "Tell her soon," Sandra said. "She deserves to hear it before it hits the news. And it's going to hit the news fast. I already have 2 reporters asking me questions, and I've given them nothing but someone at the DA's office will talk within the hour." Jackson nodded. He found Evelyn in her kitchen, where she had been all afternoon making coffee for anyone who came to the door, which turned out to be a significant number of people, because 530 riders needed something to do with themselves during the waiting hours. And a lot of them had found their way to her back step, not asking for anything, just near. She'd gone through her 4 pounds of coffee by noon, and Danny had sent 2 men into town to buy more, and they'd come back with 8 pounds, and she'd gone through most of that too. She was rinsing a coffee pot when Jackson came in. She saw his face and set the pot down. "Tell me," she said. He told her. He said it plainly, the way he'd said everything to her directly, without drama, without making her wait for the significant word. Holloway, Price, Keller, charged, warrant signed. Evelyn listened. Her hands were on the edge of the sink, and she gripped it once hard and then let go. She turned to face the window over the sink, and she stood there for a moment with her back to him, and he could see her shoulders rise and fall with one deliberate breath. "Keller too," she said, not a question. "Keller too. He came here," she said, 4 days after the fire. "He stood on my porch and told me to think about what I was doing. And the whole time he had that report in his desk." "I know. He knew me," she said. "He knew Michael. He ate in this diner." She shook her head slowly. "How does a person do that?" Jackson didn't offer an explanation. He didn't think she was actually asking for one. She was saying it the way people say things that are true and heavy and need to be spoken aloud before they can be set down. "It's going to be in the news fast," he said. "Sandra says within the hour." Evelyn turned around. Her eyes were red at the edges, but her face was composed. "My daughter is going to see it on her phone," she said. "She lives in Tempe. She's been calling. I've been keeping her back, telling her it was being handled. I need to call her before—" "Go," Jackson said. "I'll be outside." She was already reaching for her phone. Her daughter's name was Claire, and she was 34 years old, and she had her father's eyes and her mother's stubbornness. And she picked up on the second ring with the voice of someone who had been waiting for this call while trying to pretend she hadn't been. "Mom, what is happening? I've been seeing things online. There are hundreds of motorcycles in Silver Creek, and someone sent me a photo of your property. And are you okay? Why haven't you been—" "Claire," Evelyn sat down at her kitchen table. "I need you to listen to me and let me get through it before you respond." A pause. "Okay. The fire was arson. It was ordered by Richard Holloway, who was the developer who wanted my property. He paid a contractor to do it, and then he had the sheriff bury the investigation." She said it quickly, cleanly, the way she'd been unable to say it to anyone for days, because saying it out loud to people who didn't know was a different weight than knowing it herself. "As of about 10 minutes ago, all 3 of them have been arrested. Holloway, his project manager, and Sheriff Keller." Silence. "Mom, I'm fine," Evelyn said. "I've been fine. I called someone for help, and they came, and they brought investigators and an attorney, and they've been here since this morning, and—" "Who—" Claire's voice was tight with something that was caught between relief and panic and anger. "Who did you call? Who are all those people?" Evelyn looked at the black card sitting on the table in front of her. "Do you remember your father telling you about a night when I was about 36 and we found an injured man on the highway?" A silence. "The biker," Claire said slowly. "Dad told that story at Christmas one year. When I was, I don't know, maybe 12, he said you both helped someone and the man gave you a card." "I kept it," Evelyn said. "After your father died, I kept it." "And those are 530 of them," Evelyn said. The sound Claire made was not a word. It was the sound of someone trying to hold several emotions in the same space and finding the space insufficient. "Mom," she said finally, "why didn't you call me?" "Because there was nothing you could have done," Evelyn said, "and because I didn't want you to worry, and because—" She stopped. "Because I needed to handle this myself first. Your father built this place. I couldn't let someone take it without fighting for it the only way I knew how. I would have come. I know you would have. And I needed to know I could stand here without that." She said it gently but without apology. "I'm your mother. I need to be able to stand up for what's mine." Claire was quiet for a long moment. "Are you coming home?" Evelyn asked. "I can make up the back room." "I'm already packed," Claire said. "I've been packed for 2 days. I was just waiting for you to call me." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. Her daughter. Michael's daughter. "Drive safe," she said, always a pause. "Mom, yeah. Dad would be so proud of you." Evelyn pressed her hand flat against the table. "I know," she said. "I know he would." Richard Holloway was still in his office when they came for him. He'd sent his assistant home at 3 o'clock because he couldn't stand being watched. Right then, Kuo couldn't stand anyone in the room who might record his face as the afternoon turned and the information from his contacts dried up one by one. His attorney in Phoenix had called twice. The second call was the one that told him the DA was involved. He'd sat with that information for an hour, turning it looking for angles that weren't there. I was not a man who had experience with corners. His life had been defined by the width of his options, by the number of doors available to him at any given time. Wealth and connection and the kind of influence that's never written down, but everyone can feel these things, had given him a life in which corners were for other people. He was sitting at his desk when the door of his office opened. 2 state agents, and behind them a local deputy whose face Holloway recognized, a young man named Torres, who had been on Keller's force for 3 years and who looked right now like someone who had been told to do something uncomfortable and had decided to do it correctly rather than comfortably. The lead agent was straightforward, professional. He said the words that people in his position say, and he said them clearly. Holloway listened. He did not argue. He did not reach for his phone. He did not do any of the things that innocent men did because he was not innocent and he knew it. And in this moment, with the whole architecture of the past 14 months visible in a single frame, he found that he had very little to say. He thought about Evelyn Parker, who had said no to him across a table in her diner. I thought about that particular moment, her voice, her face, the absolute unremarkable certainty of it. And he thought about everything he had set in motion because of that no, and everything that had come back because of it. And he thought about the 530 motorcycles that he'd watched from his window this morning, and the fact that he had looked at a 62-year-old widow alone in the desert and calculated that she had nothing behind her. He stood up. He put his hands where they asked him to put his hands. He did not resist. Garrett Price's attorney had not been fast enough. By the time Price walked into the Scottsdale attorney's office, the warrant was already drafted. His attorney spent 45 minutes on the phone in an adjacent room, while Price sat in a leather chair and looked at a framed photograph of the Arizona desert on the wall, the kind of generic art that offices put on walls to signal a kind of calm they rarely contain. And he thought about the chain of decisions he'd made over the past 14 months, each one feeling in the moment like the reasonable next step from the one before it. The attorney came back in. He sat down across from Price. "It's not good," he said. "I know it's not good," Price said. "Tell me where we are." "The contractor has given a complete statement. He's detailed 2 in-person meetings with you, a recorded phone call, which you apparently didn't know was being recorded. He saved it in the payment structure through Southwestern Infrastructure. He remembers specific phrases you used." The attorney looked at his notes. The phrase "Mr. Holloway's project" appears 7 times in the statement. Price closed his eyes. "The company account has been subpoenaed," the attorney continued. "The money trail is clear. Your name is on the transfers." A pause. "Garrett, I want to help you, but the path to helping you requires you to tell me everything right now in this room, and then we decide together what cooperation looks like." Price opened his eyes. He knew, he said, every step, every decision, every payment. "I didn't make a single call that Richard Holloway didn't authorize." He looked at the attorney. "I want that on the record. Whatever happens to me, I want it on the record that I was not operating independently." "That's noted," the attorney wrote. "And I believe you, but I need to know, Is there anything beyond the fire? Anything else involving this property? Other properties, other situations where similar methods were used? Price was quiet for a moment. You remember the Vasquez family, he said. The well. The attorney looked up. And the Breckett property, Price said. The code violations that preceded that sale. And a situation in Mineral Springs 3 years ago that never made news. He met the attorney's eyes. I was involved in all of them, different degrees, same methods. The attorney set down his pen. Garrett, he said, you're not just a witness, you're a material part of a pattern. I know, Price said. That changes what cooperation means. I know that too. Price looked at his hands. I want to cooperate, fully, whatever it takes. He paused. I've been carrying this for 3 years. The Vasquez families, didn't just stop working. You understand what I'm saying? It was deliberate. And I knew it, and I let it happen. And I've been telling myself that it was just business, and that the people we were dealing with had options. He stopped. They didn't have options. That's what I know now. They had no options, and we made sure of it. He looked at the framed desert photograph. I'm tired, he said to Thom. The news broke at 5:47. It broke on a Phoenix station first, a brief factual report anchored by a correspondent who had driven to Silver Creek that morning when the motorcycles made it interesting, and who had spent the afternoon building the story and had sources inside the DA's office. Then the Tucson station picked it up. Then it moved to The Wire. By 6 it was national. Not because a developer had been arrested for arson that happened in America and was a story, but not necessarily that kind of story. It was national because of the photographs, because of the image that a freelance photographer had taken at approximately 2 in the afternoon. Evelyn Parker, 62 years old, white hair, work-worn hands, standing in front of the scorched skeleton of her cafe, and beside her Jackson Raven Cole looking at the same burned building. And behind them, as far back as the photograph reached, 530 riders. A widow, an 18-year-old debt, 530 motorcycles. That was the story. It was the kind of story that moved through people quickly, the kind that arrived in a person's chest before their brain finished processing it, and by 7 o'clock it was being shared in ways that the news cycle rarely produced anymore. Evelyn didn't know any of this until Darlene came over at 6:15 and put her phone on the kitchen table without saying a word and pointed at the screen. Evelyn looked at the photograph. She looked at it for a long time. That's me, she said. That is very much you, Darlene said. She studied her own face in the photograph. I look tired. You look like a woman who has been through something, Darlene said, and survived it. Evelyn handed the phone back. It's going to be a lot of people. It's already a lot of people. My granddaughter in Ohio just texted me. She says it's on her feed. Darlene sat down. Evelyn, this is the whole country. Evelyn thought about that for a moment. She thought about the photograph of herself and Jackson standing in front of Michael's burned cafe, going from phone to phone to phone across the country, arriving in living rooms and kitchens and waiting rooms and wherever it was that people looked at their screens. I hope it means something, she said. I hope when people look at it, it means something real to them and they don't just move on. I think it will, Darlene said. Jackson found out about the photograph from Danny around 6:30. He was outside having a conversation with a group of writers from the California chapter about the logistics of the next 2 days, where people were sleeping, what the plan was going forward. When Danny held up his phone, Jackson looked at the photograph. He said nothing for a moment. It's everywhere, Danny said. I can see that. Press is going to want to talk to you. They can want, Jackson said. Jackson. This isn't our story, Jackson said. He looked at Danny. This is her story. Whatever press wants to do it goes through her, not through us. We were here to help. We're not here to be the story. He handed the phone back. Make sure the guys understand that. Danny nodded. Already on it. Jackson looked out at the property, at his people, at the town, at the burned building that was also somehow still Evelyn's husband's building, and he thought about the way things connected. How a night of rain 18 years ago had reached forward through time and become this afternoon. How one decision, Michael Parker extending a hand and helping a stranger without asking why, had grown forward through almost 2 decades into something 530 people wide. I thought about what Evelyn had said about Michael kindness compounds. Slowly and then all at once. He believed that. He had seen it work in the opposite direction. To cruelty, compounded fear, compounded silence, compounded, and that was what had built Richard Holloway's particular kingdom. Not one corrupt act, but a long accumulation of them, each one possible, because the previous one had gone unchallenged. The question was always which one compounded faster. The call that nobody expected came at 7:15. It came to Sandra Cho's cell phone and she took it outside the folding table, pacing 20 feet away, with her legal pad under her arm. And when she came back, her face had the expression of an attorney who had received information that significantly changed the landscape. She pulled Jackson aside. "Talk to me," he said. "Garrett Price's attorney made contact with the DA's office 20 minutes ago," she said. "Price is offering a full cooperation agreement, and he's not just offering information about the fire." Jackson waited. "He's offering documentation on 4 additional cases," Sandra said. 3 property acquisitions and 1 incident involving a municipal water source, all within the county, all following similar patterns. She looked at him. "This is bigger than Evelyn's Diner, Jackson. This is a systematic pattern of coercion and property theft targeting people who couldn't defend themselves. The DA is going to have enough to take down not just Holloway and Price, but potentially 2 county commissioners who signed off on certain assessments and a contractor who handled the Vasquez situation." Jackson was quiet. "How many families?" he said. "At minimum 5 that we know of. Price is saying there are others." Jackson looked at the burned cafe. "They all deserve what Evelyn's getting," he said. "That's why I'm telling you," Sandra said, "because I need to know if you're willing to stay involved, not just here, the families who were already pushed out the Breckett property, the Vasquez family, the others, they're going to need legal support and someone to stand behind them when they come forward." Jackson did not hesitate. "Tell Price's attorney we want everything he has," he said. "Every name, every property, every family." He paused. "And find the Vasquez family. Wherever they went. They need to know someone's listening now." Sandra nodded. She was already writing. Thomas Keller was processed at the county facility at 6 o'clock, which meant that several of his deputies, men and women who had worked for him for years and who had understood in varying degrees of clarity that their sheriff did certain things for certain people, had to stand in the same building and watch. His deputy Torres was the one who handled the paperwork. Torres had been on this force for 3 years. He was 27 years old and had taken the job because he wanted to be something useful. And he had spent 3 years watching Thomas Keller be something useful to the wrong people and telling himself it wasn't his business. He did the paperwork carefully, professionally, without looking at his former boss's face. When it was done, Keller said, "You're going to be the one they call a good cop, Torres, after all this." Torres looked at him. "I'm going to try to be," he said. "Sir." He went back to his desk. He sat down, he called his wife and told her he was going to be late and that he was all right and that he'd explain later. Then he pulled out his notepad and he started writing down everything he knew, everything he'd seen and heard and been told to ignore over 3 years in clear-dated, specific language. He wrote for 2 hours. When he was done, he drove to where the state agents were set up and he knocked on the door and handed them what he'd written. "I should have done this a long time ago," he said. The agent looked at the pages, looked at Torres. "Better late," she said. "Is it?" Torres asked. He wasn't being rhetorical. He genuinely wanted to know. She thought about it. For the people who needed someone to do the right thing, it might have been too late to prevent what happened. But for what comes after, yes, it's better that you're here. Torres nodded. He drove home. I was not the hero of the story. He knew that. He was something smaller and more ordinary, a person who had waited too long and then hadn't waited any longer. He wasn't sure what that amounted to in the final accounting, but it was what he had, and he'd given it, and that was going to have to be enough. Bang. By 8 o'clock, Evelyn's daughter Claire arrived. She drove 4 hours from Tempe, stopping only once, and when she pulled into the property, navigating past the bikes still lining the road, past the riders who directed her in with the easy authority of people managing a situation they understood, and she got out of her car and saw her mother standing in the porch light of the small adobe house. She crossed the distance between them at a pace that wasn't quite a run, but was close. They held each other for a long time. Evelyn felt her daughter's shoulders shaking and held her tighter and said nothing, because sometimes nothing is what the moment needs, just the reality of 2 people in the same place, in the same arms after too long apart. Finally, Claire pulled back. She looked at her mother's face. "You look tired," she said. Darlene said the same thing. "You are tired." "I'm tired," Evelyn agreed, "but I'm here." Claire looked past her at the burned cafe. She had grown up in that building. She had done homework in the corner booth and washed dishes in the kitchen and listened to her father's voice moving through the whole structure, filling it up the way certain voices fill spaces. Her face did something complicated. "It's gone," she said quietly. "Most of it." Evelyn stood beside her. "The bones are there, the foundation's intact." Dad would have... Claire stopped, started again. He would have had a plan already. He would have already been figuring out how to rebuild it. "I know. Do you want to rebuild it?" Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She looked at the building, at what remained of the sign over the door. Scorched but still attached, Michael's handwriting, in the gold lettering, still visible in the porch light, if you knew what you were looking at. "Yes," she said, "I do." Claire took her mother's hand. "Then we will," she said. Jackson came by at 9, just briefly to say, the riders from the California and Nevada chapters were going to camp 20 miles east of town for the night and come back in the morning. The Arizona contingent was splitting between several locations locally. The investigators and Sandra were at a motel a mile away and would be back at dawn. "You should sleep," he told Evelyn. "I will." "Your daughter's here?" "She is." He looked at her. "You did good today, staying on your property, making the call, all of it." He said it without sentiment, the way you say something true when you don't want it dressed up. "Michael kept the card," Evelyn said. "Michael sounds like he knew what mattered." "He always did." She paused. "Jackson, there are other families. Sandra told me about what Price said, other properties, other people." Jackson met her eyes. "I know," he said. "They need what I got," she said. "Someone in their corner, something to stand behind." "I know that too," he said. "We're working on it." She nodded. He turned to go. Got 2 steps. "Jackson," he stopped. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for today, for keeping the debt. Most people would have let 18 years dissolve it." He looked back at her. "You kept a card for 18 years, he said. "That's not nothing either." He walked back to where his people were. Evelyn went inside. The kitchen still smelled like coffee. Her daughter was at the table with her shoes off and her phone face down and 2 cups poured, waiting. Evelyn sat down. They didn't talk about the news or the photographs or the national attention or what came next. They talked about Michael the way they sometimes did when they needed to put him in the room with them, because the room was better with him in it. Claire told a story Evelyn hadn't heard something from when Claire was 9, a camping trip, a collapsed tent, her father laughing until he cried in the rain. Evelyn told one back, and then another. Outside, the desert night was quiet, punctuated occasionally by the sound of engines in the distance. 530 reasons she was still standing. Inside, it was just 2 women and a dine and the memory of a good man. And for tonight, that was everything. Part 5. What gets built from the ashes? Evelyn woke at 5:30 the next morning, the way she'd woken every morning for 28 years, before the alarm, before the light, in the specific quiet that belongs to people who have spent decades getting somewhere before anyone else arrives. Old habit, older than grief, older than the fire. She lay still for a moment and listened. Outside, she could hear the desert morning, the particular silence that isn't silence at all, but a layering of wind and distance, and the first tentative movements of birds who hadn't decided yet whether the day was safe. And underneath that, something else. The low murmur of voices, the occasional sound of boots on gravel, the distant idle of an engine turning over somewhere east of the property. They were still there. She hadn't fully believed they would be. She'd gone to sleep the night before, half convinced that she would wake up and the parking lot would be empty and the road would be clear, and it would be just her and Claire and Biscuit in the burned building, and some part of her had been bracing for that, for the return to aloneness, the way you brace for cold water even when you know it's coming. But they were still there. She got up. She put on coffee. She stood at her kitchen window and watched the gray morning come up over the desert, while the pot filled the kitchen with the smell of something normal and good, and she let herself feel for just a minute the full weight of the past week. Not to be crushed by it, but to carry it consciously, the way you carry something you're going to set down soon and want to know the shape of before you do. Claire came in at 6 barefoot, her hair not yet done, looking like she'd slept the way young people sleep when they've driven 4 hours and cried for some of it deeply and without moving. "You're already up," Claire said, "always. You're going to tell me your body just does this?" "My body just does this." Claire poured herself a cup and sat at the table. She looked at her phone briefly, then put it face down. It's everywhere, Mom, like international. There are people talking about this in Germany. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Germany. And Australia. And I stopped reading because it was making me feel strange. Claire wrapped her hands around her mug. How are you feeling about all of it? Evelyn thought about it genuinely because Claire deserved a genuine answer. I don't want it to be about spectacle, she said. I want people to see it and think about who they know who doesn't have anyone. That's what I want it to be about. Claire looked at her mother. Dad always said you had the clearest head of anyone he'd ever met, she said. Your father was biased. Probably, Claire said. He was also usually right. Sandra Cho arrived at 7 with coffee from the motel and a legal pad that already had 15 new lines on it, in the expression of someone who had been working since before most people were conscious. She sat across from Evelyn at the kitchen table. Claire moved to give her space and took her coffee to the doorway, and Sandra put down the pad and said, I want to walk you through where things stand so you understand your position going into the next few weeks. Please, Evelyn said. Holloway was arraigned this morning at 6. He entered no plea. His attorney asked for additional time, which is standard, and was given 7 days. Bail was set at $800,000. He posted it within the hour, which means he's out, but he has conditions. No contact with any witnesses, no access to property records in the county. His passport has been surrendered. She looked up. He's not coming near you. I didn't think he would, Evelyn said. That's not who he is. He doesn't do things directly. You're right about that, Sandra said, which is actually part of why the charges are as strong as they are. The paper chain between him and the direct action is documented, and it shows a pattern of deliberate insulation. That kind of structure reads badly to juries. And Price's cooperation agreement was finalized at midnight. He gave full statements on 5 separate instances of property coercion, including the Vasquez well. The 2 county commissioners he named are under investigation. As of this morning, their names haven't been released yet, but it will happen fast. She paused. Garrett Price is not a good man, but he gave us everything in exchange for cooperation credit, which his attorney negotiated, and which the DA accepted because what he gave them is worth significantly more than what they were going to give him credit for. The Vasquez family, Evelyn said. Danny's team located them last night. They're in Tucson. The father, Roberto Vasquez, is working 2 jobs. They left Silver Creek 14 months ago when the well failed and the county declined to help. Sandra met her eyes. They're going to be contacted today. They have claims, real ones. With Price's cooperation, those claims have direct evidentiary support. Evelyn sat with that for a moment. Roberto Vasquez, 2 jobs in Tucson, 14 months gone from a place that had been his family's, for she tried to remember she thought his father had owned that land. Maybe longer than 28 years. Maybe longer than the Golden Mesa Cafe. Make sure they know someone is standing with them, Evelyn said. Make sure they know before anything else. Jackson said the same thing, Sandra said. Good. Evelyn looked at her coffee cup. What about the insurance? Your claim has been formally reopened under the correct classification arson by third party. The original denial, which was based on Keller's false report of faulty wiring, is being challenged. With the fire marshal's report and the criminal charges, the insurer has no defensible basis for denial. Sandra permitted herself a small, precise smile. I expect a settlement conversation within 30 days. Evelyn looked up. A real one. A real one, Sandra confirmed. Enough to rebuild. Possibly more than that, depending on how their exposure calculates out. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Claire in the doorway had gone very still. Evelyn put both hands flat on the table. All right, she said, all right. She said it like someone who had been holding a door closed with her whole body for a long time and had just felt the pressure on the other side give way. Jackson found her outside an hour later. She was standing in front of the burned cafe, same spot she'd been standing in for days, had stood through the night of the fire, had stood when the first motorcycle appeared on the road, and she was looking at it the way you look at something when you're deciding what it is now instead of what it was. He came to stand beside her. They stood together in the morning quiet, looking at charred wood and scorched concrete and the bent aluminum of the awning frame that had held on through everything like a stubborn old thing that didn't know how to fall. Walk me through it, Evelyn said. He looked at her, through what it would look like to rebuild. He looked at the structure. He was not an architect, but he was a man who had spent 40 years making things work with whatever was available, and he'd learned to look at what was broken and see the bones of what could be rebuilt from it. Foundation solid, he said, I know. Front wall on the east side held up better than you'd think. The kitchen's a gut, everything has to come out and start over. But the load-bearing structure on the north side is still standing. He paused. If you keep what survived, the rebuild is faster and cheaper than starting from nothing. I want to keep the sign, she said. He looked up at the sign, Michael Parker's gold lettering, scorched and smoke-darkened but intact. The Golden Mesa Cafe still readable if you knew it was there. We can work around the sign, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Jackson, she said, I need to say something to you, and I need you to let me say it without deflecting it. He looked at her. Oh, what you did, what all 530 of you did came from one night. One night 18 years ago when Michael and I did the thing any decent person should have done, which is help someone who needed help. We didn't do it expecting anything back. We didn't do it thinking about the future. We did it because it was 2 a.m. and a man was hurt and there was nothing else to do. She held his gaze. And you turned that into this. You kept it for 18 years and you turned it into this. That's not just returning a favor, Jackson. That's something else. I don't have the exact word for it. Jackson was quiet for a long moment. Michael extended a hand to a stranger, he said. That's the beginning. Everything after that is just the distance the hand traveled. Evelyn looked at him. He would have loved that you said that, she said. He'd have probably put it better. Probably, she agreed. He was a better talker. The meeting happened at 10 o'clock. Jackson called it, and it was brief, held outside in the open with the property behind them and the road in front in the desert morning, going warm around everything. 200 of the riders who'd stayed locally were present, spread across the lot and into the road, and the rest were represented by their chapter leads, and Sandra was there and Claire was there. And Darlene was there because Darlene was constitutionally incapable of being absent from anything significant within a quarter mile of her house. Jackson stood in front of the burned building. He did not use a microphone. He didn't need one. He had a voice that carried the way certain voices carry, not by volume, but by weight. This woman's husband built this place, he said. He's been gone 5 years, and she kept it going because it was his and because it was theirs and because some things you don't let go of just because they got hard. He paused. Some people decided that her holding on made her a problem, and they did what people do when they've got power and no conscience and think nobody's watching. He looked out at the group. We came here to watch. We came here to make it clear that somebody was watching. And that part is done. The law is doing what the law is supposed to do. The people responsible are going to answer for what they did. He let that sit. Now I want to talk about what comes next, he said, because justice is one thing, but this woman still has a burned building where her husband's cafe used to be. And I don't know about you, but I didn't ride all the way out here just to watch the law do its job and then go home. The group was quiet. We have carpenters, he said. We have electricians. We have plumbers and concrete guys and people who can hang drywall and people who can wire a commercial kitchen. I've done a personal inventory of the skills in this group, and I am telling you that between 530 people, we have everything it takes to rebuild this building. He looked at Evelyn. If she'll let us. Every head turned to Evelyn. She stood with her arms crossed and her chin slightly up and the expression of a woman trying to hold herself together in public because she believed in holding yourself together in public. I'll let you, she said. It started that afternoon, not tentatively, not slowly. The way things start when 530 people who know how to work put their hands on something all at once and with purpose. The burned interior of the cafe was cleared in 4 hours. Men who had spent careers as contractors and builders moved through the space with the efficiency of people who'd done this kind of work for decades and didn't need to be told twice. The damaged materials came out. The salvageable structural elements were identified and marked. A crew of 6 descended on the kitchen with the focused energy of a surgical team, and by late afternoon, the footprint of the new kitchen was already being laid out. 2 men, a heavy-set rider from the Flagstaff chapter named Eddie, who turned out to be a licensed electrician, and a quiet man from San Diego named Marcus, who had his master plumber's certification in his wallet because he carried it everywhere, spent the afternoon walking the structural bones and making notes in a shared notebook, working out the mechanicals with the collaborative ease of people who spoke the same professional language. A woman named Rosa, who rode with the Tucson chapter and who ran a tile business with her husband, called her supplier at 1 in the afternoon and arranged delivery of enough material to do the floor and the kitchen backsplash. And when Evelyn tried to understand the cause, Rosa waved it off with the particular gesture of someone who has already settled the question internally and has no interest in relitigating it. My grandmother ran a diner, Rosa said. Different state, different time, same kind of woman. She looked at Evelyn steadily. I know what a diner like this means to the people around it. Evelyn tried to say something. Rosa patted her arm. Go tell Eddie where you want the outlets. Claire stood at the edge of all of it for most of the morning, watching in what she felt was difficult to put into a category. It wasn't just gratitude that was too small. It wasn't just grief that was too dark. It was something in between, something that happened when loss and repair occupied the same space at the same time and your chest didn't know which one to respond to first. She called her boyfriend in Tempe around noon. I keep trying to describe it, she said, and I can't find the right words. Try, he said. She looked at the property, at the riders moving and working and talking, at her mother moving among them. With a coffee pot that seemed to have become a permanent extension of her hand, at the burn sign over the door that nobody had touched because everyone seemed to understand without being told that the sign was not their thing to touch. It looks like a barn raising, she said finally. From an old movie, except the people raising it are, she laughed, slightly incredulous. They're not what you'd picture when you picture a barn raising. Are they good people? She watched a man with full-sleeve tattoos on both arms carefully carry a piece of burned timber out of the building like it was something fragile and worth preserving. Yeah, she said, they really are. The first big twist of the day came at 2 in the afternoon, and it came from the direction nobody expected. Darlene Marsh appeared at the edge of the property with 11 other people behind her local residence. Silver Creek people Evelyn had been serving coffee to for 2 decades. They came with tools and food, and in some cases just themselves, which was its own kind of tool. Among them was Jim Breckett. The Breckett property that Holloway had acquired 3 years ago had belonged to Jim's family for 4 generations. He'd sold it or been pressured into selling it, which was a distinction that mattered, but that Jim had not until recently fully allowed himself to make. And he had been living in town ever since, running a hardware store that did fine, but that was not the thing his family had built. And carrying the quiet weight of a man who knew he'd been beaten and hadn't found a way to say so out loud. He came to the property that afternoon and he found Jackson, and he extended his hand. I heard what you said, Jim said, about the Vasquez family, about the other properties. Jackson shook his hand. You have a claim, Jackson said. Sandra will talk to you. Jim nodded. He looked at the building under construction around them. He looked at Evelyn, who was 30 feet away, explaining something to Eddie about the counter placement. She held, Jim said. She held, Jackson agreed. I didn't, Jim said. The words were plain and flat and honest in the way of a man who had decided to stop managing his own story and just tell it. Jackson looked at him. You're here now. Jim picked up a 2x4 from the stack beside him. Tell me where to put it, he said. The news crew arrived at 3, not just the Phoenix station. Now there were 3 cameras, 2 print journalists and a documentary filmmaker from Los Angeles who had driven through the night because his producer had called him at midnight and said the words barn raising and Hell's Angels and widow, and he had understood that he needed to be there. Jackson met them at the property line. He was polite, firm. You can film the building, he said. You can film the work. You film the people who consent to be filmed and nobody else. He looked at the documentary filmmaker. And you don't interview Evelyn unless she asks for the camera. She'll talk to you if she wants to. She doesn't owe you the inside of her grief. The filmmaker looked at him for a moment. Understood, he said. He spent the afternoon filming the work, the hands on timber and the sounds of saws and the conversations between people who didn't know each other's last names but knew how to work a corner joint. He filmed Jim Breckett and Rosa and Eddie and Marcus and Danny and Darlene, who turned out to have a genius for organizing food and who spent 3 hours turning the back of someone's pickup truck into a functional catering station that fed 160 people without anyone quite knowing how she'd managed it. Late in the afternoon, Evelyn found the filmmaker standing at the edge of the property looking at the sign. She stood beside him. My husband painted that, she said. He looked at her. Careful, not pushing. When we opened, she said, he was up on a ladder for 6 hours. He kept coming down and looking at it and going back up to fix something that nobody else could see. I told him it was perfect after the second hour. He said, she stopped. Something moved across her face. He said, it's going to be here after we're gone, Ev. I want it right. The filmmaker didn't say anything. He was right, Evelyn said. It's still here. She walked back toward the building. I didn't follow her. He just stood there with his camera at his side in the Arizona afternoon, going golden around everything. The second major twist came at 5 o'clock, and it hit the room, or rather the property, the way certain things hit when you've been braced for the next thing, and the next thing turns out to be something you couldn't have predicted. Sandra came to find Evelyn with her phone extended. Roberto Vasquez is on the phone, she said. He wants to talk to you. Evelyn looked at her. He heard about what's happening, Sandra said. His daughter showed him the photograph. He just wants to talk to you. Evelyn took the phone. Roberto, she said, a pause on the line. When the man spoke, his voice had the careful steadiness of someone who has been holding something together for a long time and is doing it still. Mrs. Parker, he said, I wanted to call and say what you did. Staying on your property, not leaving. He stopped. We left. My family, we left because we thought there was nothing else to do. And I've been carrying that, thinking about what we should have done different. Roberto, I know it wasn't the same situation, he said. I know you had things we didn't have, but I wanted to tell you that watching what you did made me feel something I haven't felt in a long time. Another pause. Like maybe it wasn't over. Like maybe the people who did this to us don't get to be the ones who decide when it's over. Evelyn walked 3 steps away from the noise of the construction, out to the quieter edge of the property. It's not over, she said. That's actually why I'm on the phone with you right now. Sandra is building your case. You have evidence now that you didn't have before because the man who arranged what happened to your well gave a full statement. She paused. You're going to get to tell your story. Silence. All of it, Roberto said. All of it. The silence stretched out for a long moment. My father built that house, Roberto said. His father helped him. He stopped again. She could hear him working to keep his voice level. We have photographs, old ones, of the construction, 4 generations building the same thing. Save every one of them, Evelyn said. Every photograph, every document, every letter, every receipt, all of it. Sandra will tell you what matters legally, but you save everything. Yes, he said, yes. Roberto, she looked out at the desert going orange in the late afternoon. You're not alone in this. You understand that now, a long beat. I'm starting to, he said. She handed Sandra's phone back. Sandra looked at her. He's going to be okay, Evelyn said. It wasn't a question. He is, Sandra said. The sun went down on a building that looked different than it had 12 hours ago. Not finished, that was weeks of work still ahead, but transformed in the way things transform when human hands have touched them with intention. The debris was gone. The cleared interior had the geometry of a plan. Here the kitchen, there the counter, there the dining space, and several of the interior walls had new framing, already raw lumber, clean and straight, against the old bones of the original structure. The sign still hung where it had always hung. Evelyn stood in the doorway of what was becoming the rebuilt Golden Mesa Cafe and looked at the space around her, and what she felt was not simply hope, because hope was what you felt when you weren't sure. What she felt was something more settled than that. A certainty that moved in her the way her husband's voice had moved through this building, filling it up, reaching into every corner, making it into a place rather than a structure. Jackson came to stand behind her. How's it feel, he said. Like it's going to be real, she said. It is going to be real. I know, she turned to look at him. You're leaving in the morning. Most of us are. The Arizona chapters will have people here for another week. Eddie and Marcus are staying for 3 weeks. They already talked to their people. He paused. Sandra's here until the legal piece is solid. That's going to be a while. I know. She looked at him steadily. She stopped, started again. You don't owe me anything anymore. Whatever debt you carried, it's paid. More than paid. Jackson looked at her with the dark, direct eyes that had been the same from the first night to this one. I didn't come here to pay a debt, he said. She waited. I came here because you're the kind of person the world needs more of, he said. You and Michael both. And when that kind of person gets hit by the worst of what people do to each other, you don't walk past it. He paused. That's not debt. That's just what you do when you know the difference between what matters and what doesn't. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. You should have been a preacher, she said. God help everyone if that had happened, he said. She laughed, real and full and exactly like the laugh she'd had on the phone 5 days ago when she hadn't expected to laugh. The next morning came clear and cold. Claire made breakfast for everyone who was still there, which turned out to be 47 people because Darlene had made an announcement the previous evening that anyone who wanted breakfast before riding out should be at Evelyn's kitchen at 7, and 47 people had taken her at her word. The kitchen was not large enough to contain 47 people, so they spread through the house and onto the porch and into the yard. And it was loud and crowded and warm in the way that spaces become warm when they're full of people who have done something together and know it. Evelyn cooked. She cooked the way she'd cooked for 28 years, with her whole attention, with the particular pleasure of a person who had always understood that feeding people well was a serious and meaningful thing to do with your time. Eggs and bacon and biscuits and coffee scaled up to a quantity she hadn't cooked in years, moving around a kitchen that wasn't the Golden Mesa, but was still hers, still Michael's, still the place she had stood 10,000 mornings. Jackson was the last to leave. He found her on the porch, washing a coffee mug with the garden hose, and the scene was so ordinary, so entirely, completely ordinary after everything that it made him understand something he hadn't fully articulated before about what the whole thing had been about. Not drama, not justice as an abstract. Just this: a woman at a sink, a mug, a morning, the right to be ordinary in the place that was yours. Safe roads, Evelyn said. Always. He looked at the building behind her, the framing going up, the sign still hanging, the raw new wood beside the burned old wood. You call me when it's done, he said, when you're ready to open. I want to bring people. She raised an eyebrow. How many people? However many you can feed. She considered this. I can feed a lot of people, she said. I know you can. He walked to his bike, started it, looked back once. She raised her hand. He pulled out onto the road and rode west, and the sound of his engine was joined by others, and then more others, and for a few minutes the air was full of the sound of motorcycles leaving Silver Creek the same way they'd arrived, in formation, unhurried, certain. Then it faded. Then it was gone. The desert morning reasserted itself. Wind, distance, the tick of things cooling, and the sounds of men working on a building 30 feet away. Claire came out and stood beside him. You okay? Claire asked. Evelyn looked at the road where the bikes had been. I'm good, she said, really good, or Mom good. Really good, Evelyn said, the real kind. The Golden Mesa Cafe reopened on the first Saturday of October. 6 weeks after the fire, 3 weeks ahead of what anyone had estimated. The insurance settlement had come through substantial clean, covering the full rebuild and damages, and Sandra had leveraged the criminal charges against Holloway into an additional civil settlement that Evelyn had not expected, and that landed in her account on a Thursday morning and made her sit at her kitchen table for 20 minutes before she called Claire. It's enough, she told Claire. Enough for what? Enough to rebuild properly. Enough to pay Eddie and Marcus for their time, which they said I didn't need to do, and which I'm doing anyway because I am not a charity case. I am a person who pays what she owes. A pause. And enough to help the Vasquez family with their legal costs. Mom, don't argue with me, Evelyn said. Roberto Vasquez's father built that house. 4 generations. I have more than I need, and they need more than they have. It's not complicated. Claire did not argue. The reopening was not a small event. It had never been going to be a small event. The photograph had traveled too far for that. The story had taken root in too many people for that. They came from Silver Creek, of course, almost the entire town, including people Evelyn barely knew, and people she knew very well, including Jim Breckett, who came early and stayed late and helped carry tables, and Darlene, who came the night before and helped decorate and then pretended she hadn't. They came from Phoenix and Tucson. They came from Flagstaff and Kingman. A family drove from Albuquerque. A retired trucker drove from California. Specifically, he'd stopped at the Golden Mesa Cafe 40-some times over 20 years, he said, and he wasn't going to miss the day it came back. And they came, the riders, not 530 this time, closer to 200, which was the contingent that could make the ride on a Saturday. But they came and they lined the road the way they had on that first morning, and this time the sight of them made the entire parking lot go quiet in a way that was not fear, but was its exact opposite. Jackson arrived last. He pulled into the lot and parked and walked through the crowd, which parted for him the way crowds part for people who carry a certain kind of natural authority, not demanded, just recognized. And he came to where Evelyn was standing at the door of the rebuilt cafe. She was wearing a blue apron. Her hair was in its usual bun. She looked exactly like herself. "You kept the sign," he said, looking up at it. "I told you I would." The sign was restored, the original wood cleaned and repainted by a woman from the Flagstaff chapter who restored antiques professionally and had spent 2 evenings bringing it back without changing it. Michael Parker's gold lettering exactly as he'd painted it. The Golden Mesa Cafe. "He said it would be here after they were gone," Evelyn said. He was right. Jackson looked at her. "You ready to open?" She put her hand on the door. She thought about Michael on a ladder for 6 hours, coming down and going back up, getting it right because it was going to be there after. She thought about a rainy November night and a man bleeding in the rain. She thought about 18 years and a black card in a junk drawer and 4 words in her husband's handwriting. She thought about Roberto Vasquez's voice on the phone breaking and then steadying. She thought about Jim Breckett with a 2x4 in his hands, standing in the rubble of someone else's loss, deciding it wasn't too late to stand up. She thought about the way kindness compounds, slowly and then all at once. She opened the door. "Coffee's on," she said. The crowd moved forward. The Golden Mesa Cafe was open. And Evelyn Parker, widow owner, the woman who refused to be erased, stood behind her counter in her husband's cafe and poured the first cup and the second and the third, and she kept pouring the same way she always had, the same way she intended to keep doing for every stranger and neighbor and traveler and friend who walked through her door and needed something warm to hold. Some things get burned down. And some things, when you build them back up with the right hands and the right reasons, come back stronger than they were before, and they stay.